Hello, I wanted to briefly go over a section from the Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers by Diogenes Laertius. This will be from Book 10, which is on Epicurus, and specifically section 47, which is within the letter to Herodotus. And we will see at the end of this section, Epicurus says, Kresimon de kai tuto kataskein to stoikeion, which Hicks translates, "This is an elementary fact which in itself is well worth bearing in mind," and Bailey, "It is of advantage to grasp this first principle as well." As to the question, what is this principle that is well worth bearing in mind, there is a little bit of disagreement among the editors. Among those who would keep 46 in its original position, we have Hicks representing, and among those who would transfer section 47 to come after section 62, we have Bailey representing. So this gives us a different context for 47. For Hicks, this gives us the context of total speed, and for Bailey, the context of vibration. So this leads to different interpretations. For those who would keep it in its original position, we have the topic of apparent instantaneity, while those who would move it interpret it largely within the lines of unified motion. And this does lead to a different conclusion as to the principle that is worth bearing in mind, with Hicks and those who would keep it in its original position coming to a topic in change in direction, and Bailey and those who would move it continuing on the topic of unified motion. And before we get started, I wanted to mention that this is more of an exception than the rule. In general, there is a lot of agreement about the structure and even the interpretation of the letter to Herodotus. So if we keep 47 in its original position after 46, its context is total speed. And here we have Hicks' translation. Furthermore, so long as nothing comes in the way to offer resistance, motion through the void accomplishes unimaginable distance in an inconceivably short time. For resistance encountered is the equivalent of slowness, its absence the equivalent of speed. So if we move section 47 to be after section 62, we have it coming after the general topic of vibration. So we have Bailey's translation. As a matter of fact, all atoms are equal in speed. This will be said because even in the least period of continuous, that is, directly perceptible time, all the atoms in aggregate bodies move towards one place. Even though in movements of time perceptible only by thought, they do not move towards one place, but are constantly jostling one against another, until the continuity of their movement comes under the ken of our sensation. So here we have that aggregate bodies appear to move as a unit, even though we know the atoms that compose them are moving in all directions. So to continue with section 62, for the addition of opinion with regard to the unseen, that the moments perceptible only by thought will also contain continuity of motion, is not true in such cases. For we must remember that it is what we observe with the senses, or grasp with the mind by an apprehension, that is true. In other words, we may at first think that atomic motion mirrors the motion of the aggregate, but we know better than to think that this is really the case. So with this different location and the resulting different context, we of course get different interpretations. Again, seeing apparent instantaneity, if we keep it in the original position, and unified motion, if we move section 47. So in the original location, we have the topic of apparent instantaneity, And here is Hicks's translation. Not that if we consider the minute times perceptible by reason alone, the moving body itself arrives at more than one place simultaneously, for this too is inconceivable. Although in time perceptible to sense, it does arrive simultaneously, however different the point of departure from that conceived by us. For example, if we bring a torch into a dark room, it appears to light up the room instantly, even though the light actually had to travel from the torch across the room. And here is the same passage, but put in a different location and translated by Bailey. And you'll see here how the focus shifts a bit. Nor must it either be supposed that in moments perceptible only by thought, the moving body too passes to the several places to which its component atoms move, for this too is unthinkable. And in that case, when it arrives altogether in a sensible period of time, from any point that may be in the infinite void, it would not be taking its departure from the place from which we apprehend its motion. As to the meaning of this, we'll look at Bailey's discussion of the passage. So here is Bailey's discussion of his translation. The motion of the whole body is the sum of the motions of its component atoms. But these motions are an infinite series of tiny trajects in all directions. It might then be supposed that the whole body performs this entire series of motions, and arrives at the end of its journey after having followed a devious course in all directions. Such an idea is really inconceivable, and would moreover be a direct contradiction of our sensations. For in that case, the whole body will have come from any possible spot in any direction from which one of its atoms started, and not from the place from which we saw it start. The objection is put in a very exaggerated form, but it is not difficult to see the thought underlying it. If the motion of the compound body is the sum of the motions of its component atoms, are not those imperceptible motions alone real, and is not the motion of the compound a delusion? Epicurus replies with an emphatic negative. The motion of the compound is a reality determined by the collisions of the component atoms. Or, if we may translate it more literally, the motion of the compound is a sensible likeness of the sum of the component motions. As separate identities, the atoms perform their tiny trajects at infinite speed, but as parts of the new unity, they combine to perform a new motion. The compound is more than an aggregate, it is an entity. Its motion is more than the sum of its motions, it is a new reality. So that explanation leads us well into the conclusion for section 47 as translated by Bailey. For the motion of the whole body will be the outward expression of its internal collisions, even though up to the limits of perception we suppose the speed of its motion not to be retarded by collision. It is of advantage to grasp this first principle as well. And for contrast, and in its original position, we have Hicks's translation. For if it changed its direction, that would be equivalent to its meeting with resistance, even if up to that point we allow nothing to impede the rate of its flight. This is an elementary fact which in itself is well worth bearing in mind. So with this difference in location, we have a resulting change in context, and of course we get different interpretations. With Hicks, we have, if the particles change directions, it indicates that they have experienced an impact. Keep this in mind. And with Bailey, the motion of the whole body will be the outward expression of its internal collisions. Keep this in mind. Now with Hicks, we do have the obvious situation that that interpretation is antagonistic to the swerve. And with Bailey, we have the meaning that is fine, and also his argument is good. I don't think it is antagonistic to the philosophy or that it is too subtle, but I do not think the argument is sufficient to justify moving the entire passage either. So if we keep section 47 in its original location, we're going to have to feromenon soma within the context of films. So we have a body that is being carried in the context of films, a carried body of film, which leads to a natural translation of a carried frame of film. And we do see this definition of ta soma as a frame, which does make sense for a distinct unit or structure. And we also have the definition of film for ta edolan in LSJ, which does make sense. Of course, it's a substance that comes off of an object and also works to give us our visual information. So if we step back a little bit and consider the human visual speed limit for a moving object, it very much depends on where you're getting the information, and it does have a lot of variability per individual, but it seems to max out at about 400 kilometers an hour or 250 miles an hour. At that point, we're not going to be able to track a moving object as a distinct location for each second we're seeing it. Of course, the speed of films is well above this miles per hour that we're going to see, and therefore the speed of films will be immediately able to report the motion from an object that is moving within our visual range of speed. So in further support of the following new translation in the original location, wanted to look quickly here at Epicurus's book 2 on nature, where he discusses this topic. We will venture to speak now about the speed that exists in the transmission of the films. First, their subtleness, because it is far removed from the subtleness derived from the senses, indicates an unsurpassable speed for the films in their transmission. So then if we consider Epicurus's theory of films in relation to the human visual speed limit for temporal resolution, that is the smallest amount of time in which we can perceive a distinct image, we're looking at about 30 to 75 frames per second, and beyond that most people are not able to perceive a distinct image in a shorter amount of time. Now of course in Epicurus's theory each frame of film is a distinct unit, but each frame of film moves too quickly to be perceived as a distinct unit. Given the generation of frames of films is much faster than the 75 frames per second, these films appear to us to be a continuous image. Another supporting quote here from Epicurus's book 2 on nature. The films thoroughly preserve a shape similar to their source body's surface, until something encounters and turns aside some of the body's emanations, and this dispersal might establish these emanations into another form of transmission. So with this serving as an introduction, I wanted to look at our section 47, putting it in the original location and original context, but a new translation. During the minute times that we can observe through our reasoning, a moving frame of film does not arrive at multiple locations simultaneously. Accordingly, such instantaneity is mentally imperceptible. Although a frame of film does arrive as a whole in sensible time from somewhere in infinite space, a frame's location at any moment will not in reality be different than the location from which we would mentally apprehend its transmission, because being in multiple locations simultaneously will be similar to a collision, even if, up to this point, we leave the speed of its transmission as not colliding. It is useful to also hold in mind this component fact. So I think in general, what we can take away from section 47 is that past a certain rate, speeds appear to be similarly instantaneous. However, a moving body does not reach more than one place at the same time. This is impossible and impossible to imagine. Even if a frame of film moves so fast that it visually appears to arrive at multiple places at once, it is mentally perceivable that this is not possible. Instead, we know the frame will follow a path that is physically viable, and therefore a path that is also mentally comprehensible. So this completes our look at section 47. Thank you for your time.